Hola, this is the Forbes Books Podcast. I am Joe Pardavila. Thanks for joining me once again for another episode. I'm so glad you did because today I'm speaking with Janett Liriano, who is the CEO and co-founder of Inaru, a vertically integrated cocoa brand based in the Dominican Republic. We're going to talk about her entrepreneurial journey and how she's disrupting the cocoa industry. Hello, Janett. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Joe?
I'm excellent. And, I'm fascinated as a Gen Xer, and people are probably tired of me talking about the fact that I'm a Gen Xer, but growing up, in the 80s, 90s, the idea of an entrepreneur was sort of, I joke that it was a joke. Like, if someone told you you're an entrepreneur in the 80s, they'd be like, oh, what are you, unemployed? So it's funny to see how entrepreneurship has taken sort of this grand stature. So I'm always curious when folks decide to become entrepreneurs, like, who was your sort of like entrepreneurial idol? Because as a kid growing up, like David Letterman was like my media idol. So I always wanted to be in show business because of David Letterman. But who was it that was like, this is the person I'd like to emulate, or this is someone's style that I'd like to follow? Like, who was that person for you?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd have to be a little honest here, or very honest. I didn't endeavor to be an entrepreneur. It sort of unfolded that way in my life. But now that I've been one for several years in a few different ventures, I think I look up to a combination of folks. One leader in the space that I really look up to quite a lot is Warren Buffett, in terms of how much his values and his principles around being a good human being really center in his work and his success. Of course, Warren Buffett is I wouldn't call him an entrepreneur, but more so in terms of being a business leader and being very committed to the principles that he's about. Of course, I look at someone like Rihanna, who started in a particular industry where folks might not think that a pivot from being a musician to a multi-consumer good mogul in the way that she is would be the easiest pivot. But I've really admired how she's managed to leverage her personal brand and art into all of these different arenas and build really strong differentiated businesses. So Rihanna is another person that I really look up to, who's, I guess I would say, a newer entrepreneur from the music space. Warren Buffett, as I mentioned originally. And then, I feel like everybody looks up to Oprah. She's not exactly in the typical framing of an entrepreneur, but of course has many ventures herself. And I think what all these folks have in common is a commitment to what they believe is right in terms of the world that they want to live in and the energy that they want to bring forth. And they used that passion to kind of create an environment that created opportunity for other people. So when I think about myself as an entrepreneur and I look at these major icons in their respective spaces, I try to ask myself, am I holding myself to the same commitment to my values and what I want to see? So if I could be as awesome as Oprah plus Rihanna plus Warren Buffett, I think I'm doing a good job. I don't think I'm there yet, but that's kind of the amalgamation of people that I look up to.
That's awesome. Well, I hope I didn't get you in trouble because you did not mention your parents, who are entrepreneurs in their own right and sort of, pardon the pun, sort of laid the seeds to your future business. So talk to me about your relationship with your parents and how that fueled you into creating Inaru.
Oh, I love that you totally called me out on that. I deserve it. So when you asked me that question and mentioned, David Letterman, I was like, well, I was going to say my mom and dad, but I don't know.
That's my fault then. I apologize.
Yeah. I thought you were pointing me in like name people that everybody knows point of view. So, okay, well, I'm glad that you're giving me a moment to redeem myself here. Yeah, my parents, and I think also this is not just my parents, but any immigrant child might feel the same way. But my mom and dad moved to the States right before I was born, which just takes tremendous amount of courage to leave your home country to build a new life. And that journey in and of itself is extremely entrepreneurial, figuring out a new language, a new city, a new education system. And they lived here and worked here, every imaginable service job that you can imagine in the States, to give us a fantastic education so that I can have this fun conversation here with you. But before, they made those sacrifices and, took on the job of parent, which is entrepreneurial in its own right. My father has a cocoa farm in the Dominican Republic. He also had a variety of businesses in the DR as well, but right now in his retirement is really enjoying being a cocoa farmer. And my mother, I used to work with her at a little thrift shop that we had in Queens and really learned quite a lot about price sensitivity and what the market wants when you're selling in a community. So the Dominican hustle has always been there. And I think one of the things that my parents really imparted into me from a young age, that it's really less about achievement in the way that is popularly described, and it's more about how you do things. The how is really what will determine the outcome in the end. To kind of just dive deep into that a little bit more, my father, who spends a lot of time in nature, will often say that if you're planting a seed in the ground with a bad attitude and, with very little desire, it's very unlikely that that seed will grow. And, someone might say that the logical reason that that happens is because you weren't paying attention and the seed wasn't deep enough, and all of these logical reasons. But I think the spirit of what he's saying is that the intention that you set for anything that you create, how you begin is how you end. Those are the values that they really imparted in me that I've been able to, I like to think, bring to my work with a level of success that I really attribute to them. Really being focused on the process and the why, and trusting that the results will come. So, I think they did a pretty amazing job with all of us. Five daughters in New York is not an easy thing to pull off. We're all super educated, happy, healthy, innovating in our own rights. I'm building this business with my sister. And it's really thanks to their awesome influence. So I can't complain about mom and dad. They're pretty great.
And your life has taken a very circuitous route to the fact that your parents have this background in cocoa, and then you did all of you did a million things before you got to this point of working your way back to it. It's almost like The Godfather Part 3. Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. So in a way,
it's literally that.
Yeah. So you got pulled back into cocoa. So I want to talk about some of the steps you took before this, but how did that circle back moment happen where you're like, you know what, my dad was doing, this is something I could bring into 2021, 2022?
Oh, I love that. Well, one, the to your point of like the circuitous route. So I guess we'll talk about that route a little later. But how did this happen? I have to give major credit to my sister and co-founder, Janett Liriano. So for the last 7 or 8 years, the two of us, but more, let me give credit where it's due. Primarily, Erica had been working closely with my dad and managing his cocoa farm in the Dominican Republic. And it's this beautiful farm that grows avocados, cocoa, bananas, like every imaginable fruit that you can imagine, it's on that farm. And she helped him get his farm certified organic. And in this process of collaborating with my dad on his farm, we discovered a lot of things. Like our great uncle was the first person in the Dominican Republic who had a small chocolate refinery in this area called La Vega that apparently is still there. We didn't know that some of the first production of processing chocolate in the DR, my great uncle had made, which was a cool moment of heritage. And she spent some time with my dad and noticed that there is this disparity in the payment he was receiving for this organic, premium, high quality cocoa and what the fair trade price was. So she got really curious about it, dragged me into it. Like, Janet, I think there's an opportunity here. Something's up with the supply chain in the Dominican Republic. And between our backgrounds, she used to work in venture. Prior to this, I, built a biopharma alongside a team of some awesome people. Prior to that, I worked in technology as an entrepreneur. And, she really challenged me to say, we've spent so much of our time realizing the American dream here in the States for these great businesses. What would happen if we really synthesize all of the things that we've been able to learn here and bring it back to the DR and innovate in regions that have so much natural potential, but maybe lack in that sort of business experience or resources that we can more readily find in the States. And I thought that was a really awesome challenge to, kind of look in the mirror and say, these are the things that we've always wanted to do. We've always wanted to develop this opportunity in the DR. We've always said, when I make a little more money, or maybe after I exit this company, or maybe a little later, but why not now? So it was a great challenge. I took her up on it, and we spent about 2 years doing a ton of research about the cocoa industry in the DR, understanding what was going on with the producers. And then the pandemic happened, which was kind of like a blessing and a curse at the same time, where we could really literally isolate ourselves on that island and commit to building Inaru. So it came from my sister in terms of the challenge to ask ourselves, why not now? And I'm really glad that I took her up on it because, building a chocolate company is a lot of fun. It's a bit like Willy Wonka. It can feel a little crazy, but we're having a good time.
And so, Janett, when you run into folks and maybe it's future investors, What's the elevator pitch on Inaru?
Ooh, oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Yes, I am.
When I Okay, elevator pitch on Inaru. So we are verticalizing the cocoa supply chain and creating outsized value for all stakeholders, from the farmers to the investors to the consumer. We like to call enthusiasts. So what does that really mean? We're a seed to shelf chocolate brand. So from the farm all the way to the moment that you're enjoying that chocolate, Inaru creates transparency, accountability, and value for everybody that participates. We have a refinery that we're building in the Dominican Republic. We partner with our producers and profit share with them, which is a very rare thing. We're not just profit sharing off of the beans, we're profit sharing off of the finished product. So a key thing to understand, the 60-second elevator pitch for Inaru is always a challenging
Yeah.
one, because really what we're aiming to build is a multi-entity conglomerate in the cocoa space. So from seed to shelf. So that's really what it's really, I guess a better way to put it would be, if Chobani, Organic Valley, and like Land O'Lakes had a chocolate baby, it would be Inaru. Those that would be the cross section in which we operate. And I really like to use Chobani as an example. We really look up to the founder in terms of what he was able to do as an immigrant in the States with a $2 million SBA loan, built this processing capacity for a really novel product in a market that was oversaturated and undervalued, and introduced this heritage-based product of this amazing yogurt and really disrupted the sector by having that verticalization, by really being able to take advantage of those margins, employing local people, and so on. So we look at the success of Chobani over a 5-year period, and we see the same potential and opportunity to do so in cocoa and bring our producers up with us because of our profit share. So it's an ambitious goal, what we aim to do, but it's very possible if you operate from the principle that there is enough for everyone.
And is Inaru the middleman? Forgive me for that phrase. Or is the plan to be Inaru to be the brand of this cocoa product that you're making?
So I'll take you through the brief journey. The Inaru is not the middleman, and I also don't like using the phrase cutting someone out, because that creates pain. And
Yeah.
middlemen exist for a reason, and it's often to fill a need that's not being addressed by the market.
Right.
So the way that we work is, I guess, let's take a brief educational journey on the cocoa landscape, and I promise it'll be brief. So when people see fair trade, the price, the fair trade price might be $2,600 a metric ton for beans. You might think, oh, that's $2,600 that's going to the farmer. The reality is that's very, very rarely the case, because the way that these pricing models are created assumes that the exporter is also the farmer. In reality, 70% of global food is produced by smallhold farmers who own less than a hectare of land. So that is, less than a hectare of land is not much land. Most of those farmers are not exporters. They're not exporting small volume of whatever it is that they're selling. So what happens is a chain of intermediaries aggregate all of the cocoa, bring it to the exporter, who gets paid that $2,600 a metric ton. And that $2,600 gets paid down all of these different intermediaries. And eventually the producer maybe gets, I don't know, $1,000 for what should have been $2,600, because all these intermediaries are doing a job of aggregating all of this cocoa and bringing it to the ultimate exporter. So when we see these inefficiencies, and then we know that once those beans leave the country, they become very high margin, high priced chocolate, confections, all these other wonderful products that the consumer is happy to pay a premium for, not understanding that the commercial success of that finished good has nothing to do with what the producer is experiencing. So when we saw that mismatch, we saw two things. One, there's an obvious opportunity for the exporter to have a more direct relationship with the producers. So how do we make a more elegant supply chain by incorporating all of these intermediaries in our business? And two, why isn't there a direct relationship with the profitability and success of the finished product and what the producers experience? Like how do we ensure that if we're doing great selling truffles and chocolate bars, that some of that commercial success returns back to the origin of the cocoa? Those are the two things that we really wanted to focus on. So what we've done, we partner with producers directly. We do something very unusual. Our producers sign a contract with the exporter, in this case, Inaru. Inaru is an exporter. which is very rare in most of these countries. Most producers don't even know where their cocoa is ending up at the end of the day. In our model, they have a contract. They can take that to the bank. That can help them get banked. There's now a dollar value for the goods that are coming off of their farm, which is super important to bring them into, more financial stability. We profit share with our producers, as I mentioned, and we pay them typically 30% above fair trade per metric ton. All of these intermediaries that I mentioned before, we contract these individuals recognizing that they're doing something very important by aggregating all of this cocoa much better than we ever aggregate it. We offer them employment through this contractor services model. So now they have stable pay that does not come out of what the producers are supposed to be getting paid, and it redignifies their work and allows us to leverage and take advantage of the fact that there's a very very functional supply chain at work right now, but it's being forced to work in the shadows in a way that harms the stakeholders. So in this way, we pay the folks that make it possible to get all of this cocoa. We pay our producers what they're supposed to get paid. And because we're positioning ourselves as a premium brand, we can pass that traceability, transparency to our buyer, that confidence that what they're paying is actually getting where it's supposed to go, through a premium brand that has some of the best cocoa in the world. So we really wanted to take accountability and transparency a step further by building relationships with every step in our chain and bringing them into the Inaru model, so that our guarantee is a lot more than a guarantee.
And so it almost doesn't sound like you use the phrase cutting people out. It almost seems like you didn't cut people out, but you've almost streamlined it where people all know what everyone is doing, as opposed to being this very mysterious, like, I'm just going to buy the beans and sell to this one person kind of thing. It's everyone's sort of like on the same page, it seems like it.
That's exactly right. One of the things that we realize is anywhere there's ambiguity, there's opportunity for exploitation. Not
Yeah.
because anybody's a cartoon villain. I really don't believe that there's any cartoon villains in this industry. It's folks that are conditioned to work in a certain way because there's no viable alternative that's available to them. And when that's the reality, and you approach folks who you might expect to be hostile, actually, when we were raising venture for this business, the immediate question was, well, how are you not going to run into a bunch of problems with the folks that are already there? What makes you think that they're going to let you pay the producers directly, et cetera, et cetera? It's like, well, I'm recognizing the value that these intermediaries have, which is really logistics. They're not selling cocoa, they're moving cocoa.
Right.
And in these countries with far less developed infrastructure in certain areas, less connectivity, some of the assumptions that can be made in an American agricultural space cannot be made in the Caribbean or in South America. So you have to respect the know-how that these people bring to the table, but they need the right role. And the role isn't to be peeling into the payment to the producers. That should be a job. You're moving the cocoa from here to there. So in doing that, we've found that folks who would have normally been antagonistic towards us have been some of our greatest growth agents. They've connected us to other producer communities that we're not aware of. They've given us even, better ideas around the frequency of collection because they know the land better than we're going to know the land. They know the dynamics of the country better than we're going to know the dynamics of the country. So I think when you approach things from a collaborative mindset, you can find really interesting solutions that benefit everyone. So yeah, we don't cut people out. We find ways to integrate them and honor their role so that we can all win together.
It almost seems like you're rewriting the way a commodity is worked these days. Because as you know, any commodity, whether it's cocoa or whether it's rice, anything, you fill in the blank, there's always going to be someone making it, someone producing it, someone buying it, someone shipping it. So there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen. And it seems like that was sort of the problem, and essentially what Inaru was set out to fix.
You're really on the money. I love it. This is great. So commodities, when you actually look up the textbook definition, it's accurate for what it is. These are very essential, valuable goods. But when we look at how it plays out from a pricing point of view and where the power lies, at the end of the day, we know that most of the realized value for commodities is wherever the brand is. At the end of the day, it's, and one of the things that I think is so interesting about the Dominican Republic, which some folks know and some folks don't, Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the DR, back when Columbus stumbled upon the island, it really is the doorway to, a lot of things in the world that we live in today. banking, commodities trading, so much of that started right there in the Dominican Republic. So when we think about transforming these dynamics of what it means to be dealing in commodities, selling commodities, the interconnectivity of these goods that literally touch every corner of the world, the Inaru challenge, the hidden goal that's not so hidden, is how do we transform the dynamics at work in these essential industries? So when you talk about all of these folks in between, and just kind of how the commodities industry has this assumption that the base cost of the good, aka the cost of the cocoa, has to be as low as possible
Yeah.
to be able to sustain all of these exchanges of hands. We look at this and we wonder, especially with all the global supply chain issues that we're seeing today, how do we create dignified reshoring or nearshoring of a lot of these efforts? One of the reasons Inaru is building a refinery in the Dominican Republic to process cocoa is because right now, and this is a little known fact, 60% of the global organic cocoa supply is from the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
So when you think about that, that's a massive number for a tiny island. 60% of all organic cocoa comes from the DR. And what currently happens with that cocoa is that it gets on a boat to the Atlantic, gets shipped across the Atlantic, terrible environmental footprint, but okay, here we go. And then it's processed all over Europe, and then it's shipped back across the Atlantic to the States, to South America, to Asia, and in that transfer to Europe, where there's obviously much higher cost in processing, higher cost of labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, this is where you're seeing this compression and pressure on what the base cost of the cocoa is because of what happens to it once it leaves the island. So in our mind, we're wondering, how do we create a business that really creates that value in-house in the country, that we can export butter, paste, powder, beans, and eventually finished confections, so that more of that margin can reanimate and reinvest in the local community. And of course, as a business, we intend to do well. There's a lot of efficiencies in verticalization. So that's how we're looking at it. And we really do think that today's consumer wants that level of accountability from the brands that they buy from. They want more than an assurance. They want to be able to audit it themselves. And the way we've really built Inaru is so that we can pass that consumer test.
Right. And, you mentioned earlier the buyer, Unaru's buyers at the end of the day. Who are they and how do you connect with them?
Sure. So I like to say we're like B2B to C, B2B to C business. So we are and I guess some context would be good.
Yeah.
We've been operating for about 2 years, but the last year has really been what I like to, the first year was getting all of our farmers, our initial tranche of farmers, which is about 500 producers in the Dominican Republic, building those relationships, building the process for how we're going to maintain our monthly visits, et cetera. And then this past year has been getting all of our operating stuff in order. Being a multinational exporter is not an easy thing to do, but we got it done, and now we're building our refinery. But to answer your question, a target buyer would be like a Guittard or even a Hershey if they're looking to source beans. From beans, paste, butter, powder. There's a wide variety of buyers. And one of the interesting things about cocoa's derivatives is it shows up in a lot of hidden places that you might not expect. For example, beauty. Cocoa butter is a commonly used product in beauty. So when we think about positioning Inaru as a brand, we're really a premium ingredients company. So we want the consumer, both a B2B buyer and a B2C buyer, to think, oh, I want the best cocoa, I want to go to Inaru, whether that's a truffle or paste, or I want the best cocoa butter and I want to make sure that it's sourced from this company, because I know that any derivative that comes from this exporter meets the sustainability, traceability, and impact requirements that I care quite a lot about. So we're really in our ultimate, I guess, super evolved pokey form, is we're looking to be a house of brands that really is focused on premium ingredients. And that if you're sourcing from Inaru, you know that you're getting the highest quality, most impactful, and really the most ethical product that you could get in that commodity. That is how we position both consumer side and brand side.
Is that a lot to, because most companies are one or the other, the B2C or B2B. Is that sort of melting pot of things you got going on. Has that been a difficult part of this whole journey for you?
I think it's important to know the full range of where you want to go, but to do things in a sequenced way. So we're focused on B2B because that'll be the bulk of our business until we have really established that.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's really important to know where it is that you want to end up. I suppose all consumer packaged good companies that are conglomerates in the early days, it probably sounded like a lot, but we're taking it one step at a time. For example, we spent a good year securing our beans and getting all of our organic certifications and getting those term sheets from our initial bean buyers. Our current beans are being exported to Swiss buyers presently, right? So it's really about knowing the scope of your vision but growing responsibly. Being consistent on our bean sales. Now we're building a refinery so that we can meet the demand for semi-processed goods. Then, really focusing on driving strong sales in semi-processed goods for the next couple of years before we really do a concerted effort for a consumer product. So the short answer would be yes, boiling the ocean is quite a lot, but we're not really interested in boiling the ocean. We just want to sail across it.
Got it. And talk about selling across and building that company. Tell me about the investment process and getting investors and what it's like having sort of a startup in the DR. Is it more difficult than having a startup in Austin, Texas, or Pittsburgh, or one of these one of these growing cities for startups? Like what's that dynamic been like?
So I love that question. A good chunk of our cap table is tech investors, which surprises folks, but doesn't surprise me because of where I'll explain that in a bit. In terms of fundraising, is always challenging. I think anyone that says that it's easy is probably not being honest. It's doable and manageable, and it can be enjoyable as you go through it. But of course, getting VCs to understand um, the potential, the income potential, or the growth potential, or the scale potential of a business like this certainly was a process, right? Agriculture is not the most popular thing to invest in general.
Yeah.
Manufacturing, maybe less so. Consumer brands, yeah, that's an easy thing, but there's a million chocolate consumer brands. So, how do we, what were the challenges in weaving that story? I think initially the hardest part was getting folks to understand the why we were so committed to doing every part of the chain.
Mm.
We definitely heard feedback early on, why don't you just do chocolate and source the beans? It's like, well, there's a million bean to bar chocolate brands, and that's really not the impact that we're trying to create. And it's also not the economic opportunity that's in front of us, specifically in the Dominican Republic. Keeping in mind that 60% of all organic cocoa comes from the DR, and there's a lot of supply chain instability that a lot of buyers want a better solution for. Building in country processing presents a really big opportunity for whoever does it. So, really having them understand the Chobani analogy, I think helped
Mm.
investors come along the ride a little further because he certainly, I'm sure he would have had trouble raising capital from VCs. Like, I want to buy this old facility in upstate New York and build this very strange, thick yogurt that nobody really knows of. Trust me, it's good. Probably sounded very crazy. And then 5 years later, a billion in revenue speaks for itself. So, really making the parallel that manufacturing centric businesses, yes, they're capital intensive initially, but you really start to see the efficiencies and benefits shortly thereafter. It was a bit of an education and a storytelling process for me, but we got there. We've got some great folks on board, 1517, it's a tech fund out of San Francisco. Mars Bio VC, which is another fund out of LA that's focused on ag tech. The Helm, which is a great fund based in New York that focuses on women entrepreneurs. And, it's been really wonderful to have the support of folks like this as we move forward because they keep us really focused on those growth metrics that we don't want to lose sight of as we aim to do all these other things.
Hmm. And you said you're not surprised that tech investors were interested in your company, but why weren't you surprised? What was it about what you were explaining to them that you were like, yeah, this fits your vertical, even though it's not an app that goes on somebody's phone?
So, particularly for ag tech, so as I mentioned earlier, 70% of global food is produced by very small hold farmers. Most of them are off the grid, don't have cell phones, power is very variable, and it's extremely difficult to predict yields or project yields from these producer communities, because you don't really know what's going to happen any harvest season until the aggregator brings you all of your product. In our model, because we have a direct relationship with every producer that's in our model, we visit these producers monthly. It became very clear to them, which is one of the agendas of Inaru as well, that we're building a paper data trail, and in some ways we're real world networking an otherwise invisible group of people. They're only ever considered in aggregate, and that's a very difficult way to modernize the food system if there isn't the work being done on the ground to actually know what each individual node is. So people talk a lot about blockchain, people talk a lot about ag tech, people talk about all these different things that they want to deploy in some of the oldest professions that have existed in the world. But we're not going to be able to deploy those things if we don't have a steady and consistent relationship with all of these hidden intermediaries and all of these hidden stakeholders. So in our model, the way that we manage our producers and the way we're managing 500 farmers, which is no small number, this is something that we intend to scale across as we grow, and then eventually be able to leverage the data that we're getting and also push to our producer communities in a way that would be challenging to do so if you didn't have that level of connection. So I think tech investors see that our model provides a way for a lot of the technology that's being developed to be deployed. Not only be deployed, they see a really valuable way for a lot of invisible data to be pulled for how we manage our producers. And that made me really excited because it's something that I care quite a lot about, bringing these folks out of the shadows and also just improving how we work as an industry, because so much of it is offline.
Hmm. And we joked earlier about your circuitous route as an entrepreneur, but you had stops at like a pharma company. You worked at a fabric company. What did you learn from those steps you took to here? Like, what is there something that you look back and be like, man, I took away this from that job or this from that? Like, what do you think happened along the way that prepared you for this?
I appreciate that question. So I think that there's probably a common denominator is I really enjoy complex industries. So my first startup was a textile circuitry company. Co-developed some patents there. So fabrics that could heat, light, sense, collect data. I was there for about 4 years, built an international supply chain, set up manufacturing in Germany. So from that experience, and we were also selling B2B and B2C. We partnered with major apparel brands. We did some work with the US government. So that was my first foray as an entrepreneur. And I think what I learned from that experience is, one, people are not that far away. If you want to get to someone, even if it's the CEO of whatever company, or have a chat with the DoD, you can definitely get wherever you're going. You just need to be very, very focused, and make sure that you have something to offer. And I think in general, I often ask myself that, like, do I really have a solution for this person that I'm seeking to speak to? Like, is there something that I'm bringing to the table that adds value beyond the pull that I might like to get from this exchange? And if you can consistently, confidently say, I have something that will add value to this individual, you can get there. So I don't really take no for an answer very easily. That first job taught me that quite a lot. Like, I can get wherever I need to go. I just need to make sure that I just have to keep pushing. So that was interesting. And of course, a lot of my manufacturing capabilities and strengths came from that experience. I was dealing with some really, far out there technology. I don't think you see everyday fabrics that can like transfer data and produce heat and illuminate and be thrown in a washer. It was a really fun time. So there was that. The biopharma, I was chief of staff there. I was the first employee. I like to call myself employee zero. It was me and the founder, Cambrian Bio, still of the team. They're doing great. So that was a very different industry. Biopharma, building biotechs, acquiring IP from universities to build out longevity companies, acquiring later stage assets that, are in clinical trials. This is a completely different world from, hanging around fabric circuits. And I was brought onto that team to really develop a lot of the operational and organizational foundation to be a multi-asset company. So what does that mean? the structure of that company was a holding company, and then they have a bunch of subsidiaries that develop different pharmaceuticals, different therapeutics in the longevity space. And I really enjoyed that challenge of really thinking about legal, organizational structure, operating models. How can we build an intangible thing like an organization? Like, you can't really touch an organization, but it exists. The structures that make a company exist. And how do we architect that in a way that allows for the rapid growth that startups require, but keep the formality and the routine and the process and the strength that larger corporations are known for. So that was a really fun challenge. And I think what I got out of that experience, leading a team of highly technical people in the medical space, handling quite a lot with government, with investors, with all these other stakeholders, is organizational design and not being overwhelmed by both macro level thinking and micro level thinking. So it was a really great opportunity for me to kind of flex that architectural creativity at the biopharma. And of course, just like learn some fun stuff about longevity. So I think between those two experiences, how that prepared me for Inaru, of course, from the hard skills point of view, I have a very comfortable command of what it takes to make a physical product, very comfortable command of international markets and regulations and so on. I've dealt with that in a few different arenas now. I'm bilingual, so that's just the benefit of being Dominican. That wasn't too hard. But I think really it was just a synthesis of the hard skills that I've earned as a very specialized entrepreneur, married with the love that I have for what I would like to bring into the world. I think it was just a really perfect moment to synthesize those halves of my life into one thing.
That's great. No, I love it. And I love the fact that you're involved in these companies, and don't take this in a derogatory way, but they're not like the coolest thing in the world. You know what I mean? I think people are all people are so attracted to what's cool, and they just want to do something that's Instagrammable or something that's going to go viral. And I really appreciate that. And I feel like you started this company. Again, this is another thing that drives me crazy about entrepreneurs is like, I want to start this company so then I could sell it to a big company. And I don't feel like that's like a million miles away in your brain, right? Like, this is something that you love. You found a problem that you want to fix. It's not, it's not cool, but it's something that could really go a long way in changing people's lives.
No, I really appreciate that. And I totally don't take any offense, because objectively, like, playing around with circuits is not fun to a lot of other people. It was very fun to me. I thought it was the coolest. I was like, look at the staple length of this cotton. Nobody cared. I cared. Nobody cared. So, and of course, like biopharma, that's interesting to a very particular group of the universe, and it's not everybody. But very much to your point, the way I would describe myself is like, I guess it's like a deep systems thinker, but I often think, what is, like, how essential or how deep can my work be when you think about, I'm going to go somewhere totally different now, but like the mycelium network that exists across most earthscapes, which maybe you're familiar with, like, how essential can my work be in terms of how many people it touches, and how can I create change from a very essential place, is kind of my motivating factor. Like, how do I get down, down, down into the root system of whatever industry I may be in at any moment in time, and plant a seed of, as corny as it sounds, positive change. So yeah, you're right. Like, why do I care about the cocoa commodity space? Like, why should I do this? I was having a final time at the biopharma. Like, why bother? And I think, if we don't spend time, or if entrepreneurs don't go into these hard, sticky, complicated places that really are crying for innovation and are really like begging for new minds to come and transform what's possible, a lot of the things that frustrate us, that make people feel hopeless, will never change. Like, it's very easy in some ways to build a widget that'll make you millions and millions of dollars, and then build another widget. No disrespect to widgets, they're also important. But the food system, and the fact that 70% of all food producers are below the poverty line or are struggling financially, is something that should concern all of us. And that is something that businesses can solve. It objectively is. A lot of the problems that we say are really big problems: climate change, food security, ethical pay. These are very human problems. Because we made them, we can fix them. But if we abstract them to the point of it's too complicated, it'll never get solved. So for me, it's really not worth any of my mental time if I'm not spending effort in those areas. So
Yeah.
I tend to go where it's very messy.
No, I love that.
That's what I tend to like.
No, that's so fantastic. And to me, I feel like I know I'm not the smartest guy around, and I always feel like, man, these people are brilliant. They're going to like the best schools, Harvard, Stanford, and they're going to be like the next Mark Zuckerberg. And I'm like, that's really what you want to do with all your brain power, to come up with the next app that's going to come up with a filter? And I know you're not going to speak ill of other entrepreneurs, but to you, don't you find that disheartening that some of the brightest minds on the planet want to come up with the next cat filter, like instead of like solving problems
really
that you are handling on a day-to-day basis?
It's so funny, like the cat filter. I love that because I mean it's kind of true. So I've been really thinking about that. Back to the point of like cartoon villains. I know this is like a funny thing to say, but when I first got into the cocoa, I'm going to answer the question about widgets, but
Yeah.
it's related to how I viewed the cocoa industry initially. I was really curious. I was like, why is this happening the way that it's happening? Because I just can't believe that there's some guy touching his mustache, like cackling that farmers are struggling. Like, I just don't believe that there's this villainous person somewhere. And it became very obvious to me that, well, the issue is the incentives make people have to take these decisions. There is not an alternate incentive model that encourages a different decision. So I can't beef with these guys unless I can offer them something different and better, right? So when I understood that in the cocoa industry, we were able to make a lot of interesting allies. Like we have a former executive from Hershey who's an advisor and an investor. We're very friendly with the folks at Mars. Like we have no enemies in cocoa land because we all want the same good thing. When I look at entrepreneurs who are highly educated and can raise $5 million at the drop of a hat, which is not my reality, right? Like me raising $1 million, which I've done, puts me on a very shallow list of less than 90 women of color to ever have done it. Like it's a different dynamic. Yes, it's frustrating when I see folks who can have access to this capital choose to make a cat widget. But then I think about it and I'm like, okay, but why? Why are you choosing to make a cat widget, or why are they choosing to fund this? And what I'm realizing is both VCs and entrepreneurs want to be a hero of a predictable and solvable problem, because other problems feel so complex. No one wants to lose. No one wants to take the risk of having dreamed so big and failed so hard on something so important. So instead, because we all want to be heroes in some small part of our lives, we pick a problem that we feel that we will be able to achieve. And then that makes me sad when I think about it. This is my current theory. And it makes me sad because it makes me think that these folks who have so much power and potential don't really believe in their ability to affect that change. So, which is why they take these bets, because they're predictable and they're safe and all these other things. So it makes me wonder, well, how do we create an incentive system, or how do we shift the narrative so that people can feel more empowered, win or lose, to take those bets? Because even if you don't, quote unquote, make it, you will have advanced the point, right? We will be a little closer. That's a really hard thing to do in a space that lionizes winners and at the same time completely annihilates losers, as if that's not the natural cycle of progress. So it's frustrating for sure. It's a very long way to say I definitely agree with you. I can't stand the cat widgets, but I also kind of feel bad that that's all they think they can do.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man,
That's the perfect argument. It's like, hey, listen, that's cool that you're doing that, but like, you could probably do more. Like, that, I mean, I'm boiling down what you just said into like two sentences. Like, hey, listen, it's cool that you could do that, but with that brain power and that education, there's probably something more you can accomplish with that.
yeah, like I didn't go to Harvard. I don't even have a degree. I mean, I went to a liberal arts college for 2 years, and no disrespect, Emerson, Lion Pride, woohoo! But like, I mean, somebody would argue, what qualification do I have from my, liberal arts lighting design degree to be messing around in the world of commodities? And the qualification I have is intense passion, curiosity, and a refusal to honestly take no for an answer when it comes to whether or not things can change. Like we can, but you have to be willing to make a fool of yourself every once in a while, right? Like you have to be willing to not always be right, and that's okay. But I'm sure you've talked to many entrepreneurs and leaders. Like it's a very it's a very shallow game sometimes in terms of the personas that come to be, the way entrepreneurs think they need to be. That makes it hard to really focus on the work.
Yeah.
So I try not to stay too close to that.
And I feel like we've gotten to this almost go big or go home type mentality that if my company doesn't have a $3 trillion market cap like Apple, I'm a failure. That's another thing that worries me about future entrepreneurs. It's like, your company doesn't have to be valued at $1 billion for you to be happy and to change people's lives. So I just hope we don't get into that space either, where it's like, okay, if I can't be the next Steve Jobs, I'm done. I don't want to be an entrepreneur. Again, it goes back to the way you change.
I love that. No, I love what you're saying there. It's actually super important. It's like we have lost a sense of scale. A coffee shop owner is an entrepreneur, and they're creating important value that they too are an entrepreneur. The guy, I live in New York. Well, when I don't live in New York, I live in the DR, but when I'm in New York, I have a place here. And the guy who sells his hot dogs, whatever, he's an entrepreneur. He's doing his thing. And should this man feel like a failure because he's not on the cover of Forbes? Absolutely not. He's a member of our community. He's taking care of his family. Also, by the way, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. We need people to buy stuff. Like
Yeah.
we need all kinds of people, and there's also a bit of, the dirty secret of it all. We can't all have multi-billion-dollar businesses, right? We need different size businesses. Like that's just not sustainable. It's illogical if you just think about it from an economic principles point of view. And how do we have, I really do think both ethical margins is something that people don't think too much about, and being comfortable being at the right size. I have a maybe controversial thought on perpetual growth. I don't know if it'll make it into the final feed, but my there are very few things in nature that grow perpetually. And typically they're not good things. So, cancers kind of grow perpetually, black holes grow perpetually, parasites, if you leave them, will grow perpetually. And very few things just grow forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And like that's a good thing for it to do. So the reason I bring this up, when we think about the pressure for businesses and entrepreneurs to look at growth from this perspective of it has to happen constantly versus maintenance or expanding and contracting in terms of reacting to the market, this pressure to grow all the time, after a certain point, the only logical outcome, and this is to bring it back to a biological concept, is apoptosis, which is when something just pops, or it breaks under the weight of its own size because it's just too big, or it's malignant, etc. So the reason I bring this up, there's this pressure in the entrepreneurial space to be the biggest and the baddest, the biggest and the baddest. And I think we lose sight of what the purpose of a business is, in my mind, because a business is not a living thing. The people in the business are the living things, and they are living things doing things for other living things. So hopefully at the end of this all, we are enjoying our living. That's the whole point. So when you're thinking about your business, is this external pressure to be the next $1 trillion company going to be supportive for your team? Going to be supportive for the product that you wish to deliver? Is it supportive for the livelihoods that your business protects and cultivates? That's the purpose in my mind of a business. It's an entity. It's a structure that houses the livelihoods of a lot of people. And pushing that in this direction of perpetual growth, I think, quite honestly, is why we're facing a lot of the challenges, both existential and personal, in modern society. That the new wave of entrepreneurs, if they take the moment to be honest with themselves about what healthy and good feels like at work, they'll know when they need to grow and when they need to flow. So that's just kind of my thought on that. Of course, Inaru wants to grow abundantly and beautifully and take transform as much of the cocoa industry as possible. But it's certainly not my objective, and I'm happy to say this on the record, to be the only cocoa company in town. Absolutely not. There's room for everybody.
That's awesome. Her name is Janett Liriano. She is the CEO and co-founder of Inaru. Janett, thanks so much for being so open and honest and for letting me tease you along the way.
Oh, of course. Thanks. It's been a great chat. I appreciate you, Joe.
I appreciate you very much, and that's it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.